remember, rights are important, and as Professor Miliband made this observation, and I want this to be taken note by each one of us. Rights are not something that we earn. We have to, rights are not given to us, but we have to earn our rights. And how did this notion emerge? Individuals as rights bearing, and why is a charter of human rights or individual declaration, individual charters important? Let's just take very briefly a walk down history to understand how the notion of rights emerged and what is its significance in the context of Human Rights Day. Right at the outset, I must tell you, rights is a modern concept which emerged, say, in the late 17th century. It can be traced back, many have traced it back to the ancient Greek Roman republics, where the notion of rights, along with equal rights for all, was seen as integral part of our understanding. But it's only in the 17th century that the full-fledged theory of rights emerged. It was made possible by the transition that came about from absolutism to constitutionalism. The idea of constitutional authority is setting the limits to political authority. What is it that authority can do, and what is it that authority cannot do? Both are equally important. Very nicely captured in that famous statement, things that are Caesar's and things that are not Caesar's. So limits to political authority is something which has to be taken into account, and this is again a very modern notion. Prior to that, authority was seen as either divine or it was something that was there with us all along. It's only with the modern society that we see authority as something that has been deliberately created, or it is us who has created authority, so authority is accountable, responsible for what it does and also what it does not do. Alongside with this notion of authority is also the idea of a secular authority, separate from what came about in the Renaissance, post-Renaissance period, separation of state and church in the European context, establishing clearly what is it that the political authority is all about. It has nothing to do with ecclesiastical, spiritual powers. It's all about temporal powers. And that is how, you see, the setting for the human rights, or what came to be known as human rights in the 20th century, came about. We go back to the 17th century because that was the formative period. This is when there was not only the transition from absolutism to constitutionalism, this was also the beginning of a liberal tradition. Limits to political authority, seeing political authority as essentially something which will always encroach, make inroads into human existence, human rights, individual sense of autonomy, is very much part and parcel of a liberal theory. And it's within the liberal theory that the notion of rights emerged. That's the important point which we have to keep in mind. Now, the notion of rights, as I said, is a modern notion. It goes back in time, and some scholars even say it was in the 14th century, a very rudimentary sense of rights emerged. But we for all purpose, look at 17th century. Initially, rights were seen as natural, inalienable, innate, just like the physical characteristics that each one of us have. And this is how the notion of natural rights emerged. And all of us are familiar with natural rights as articulated by its founding figure, John Locke, who is incidentally also the founding figure of liberalism. What is the importance of the natural rights concept to the Human Rights Charter? First and foremost, that individuals are born with rights. These are intrinsic to us, just like the physical attributes. Therefore, these are inalienable and inviolable. 4 features of rights have been identified, which is rational, autonomy or autonomous, emotional, imaginative, and creative. These are evidently what are seen as human attributes, so rights have to take into account these characteristics. Rights are self-evident. This is another important concept which we have secured from the human rights, natural rights tradition. And the fact is, it is for protection of these rights that political authority is brought into existence. So the state political authority is created for protecting these rights. It's not the other way around. The second important aspect of natural rights into Human Rights Charter is rights are absolute and non-negotiable. Third, rights are pre-social. They are not an outcome of any social organization. So having said this set the temper of what the doctrine of rights was all about. But at the outset, I wish to point out that this notion of rights is about equal rights. That's how John Locke theorized. All of us have equal rights derived from the laws of nature, and each one of us will enjoy these rights within the framework of law. So law and liberty are complementary, they are not antithetical. However, the notion that I just spelled out had its own share of criticisms. And these criticisms are important because in the evolution of rights, these criticisms form the basis for the subsequent development of the notions of rights. First and foremost is the legality aspect. Are rights legally created, or are, as it was said by the natural rights theorists, that we are born with these rights, these are inalienable, intrinsic to our personality? The argument that some scholars, beginning with David Hume and most clearly spelled out by Jeremy Bentham in the early 18th century, that rights, if they have to be enjoyed properly, if they have to have any meaningful role in society, it has to be based on the law. Legality is important. The legal basis of rights is extremely crucial. Bentham's famous comment, natural rights are nonsense upon stilts, very aptly captured what he considered to be the incompleteness, because unless a law defines the right, sets the limits to rights, the legal basis is identified, any other statement is purely metaphysical and abstract and therefore has no meaning. So Bentham, in a way, triggers out what is generally understood as a positivist view on rights, that rights have to be properly codified in and protected by the court of law. And ever since, you find, beginning with the Bill of Rights in America, the judicial process, judicial review, which the American Supreme Court gave to itself, this notion that rights have to be properly identified, codified. America is the first written constitution of the world, and that in a way set the example for other constitutions. Professor Khan referred to the Indian Constitution. Yes, it was framed in 1950, the latest in a series that started off right from Magna Carta to Petition of Rights to the British Bill of Rights to the American Declaration of Independence to the Bill of Rights in the United States, followed by the French Declaration of of the Rights of Man, and so many more charters. Indian Constitution is important because a very lengthy chapter, 2 chapters in a way, for fundamental rights, which are seen as the inviolable, justiciable part of the Constitution. The other is what should be in terms of what are the desirable rights, which is in the directive principles. So this is how you see these constitutional documentation of rights and identifying them began. And the legal critics of natural rights very categorically stated rights must be properly defined by law. The law will set not only the limits, but it will also give us the extent of individual rights. Any other thing was wholly subjective according to them. Another important aspect within the natural rights tradition, which is something that is often criticized, is the notion of the free and equal individual born with these rights. These are, again, very contentious statements according to its critics. First and foremost, are individuals really free and equal? We are equal, we are free, but it's not in the abstract sense. It is this notion has to be understood within society, within the community, and this is where somebody like Immanuel Kant becomes important, and more importantly, Hegel, because Hegel was the one who provided the social setting for the notion of rights, when he made it very clear that whatever we are, whoever we are, our needs, everything is socially defined. And the Hegelian tradition, in a way, bifurcates. One, of course, is the Marxist tradition, and the other is the tradition that Thomas Green adopted. So within the liberal tradition, what you have is rights are within the society. The individual is a social self, and it is with that responsibility we exercise our rights. Now, this concept remains part and parcel of the evolution of rights. It, of course, played out in different ways. Now, in ways, the communitarians who argued that individuals have a meaning within society, and without that, the individual is meaningless. Or you take the multiculturalists or those who claim to be upholders of identity politics, when they speak about culture, how culture is so important to understanding the human individual. All these point out that the notion of the fair and free, fair and abstract individual is a very theoretical concept. But another interesting aspect to this by the feminists, where they pointed out individuals exist within families. This is not an individual which is free and fair, and the feminist argument take up the role of the individual within the family. So we have the critics pointing out the individual within the community, within society, within family, and it's no longer that free and equal individual. The Kantian conception that I pointed out, importance of the fact that the human individual, the human being, is basically a person of self-worth, and individuals are autonomous.